All right, we are going to be working on fallacies. I love fallacies. They're my favorite. I don't know why. When I first got to them, I remember when I first started learning fallacies when I was in college, I'm like, what is this? I hate them. I love them now. So you might see them and be like, what? But the cool thing is, especially if you have ever been on social media and never read the comment section, you're gonna see fallacies all over the place, and you're like, oh, I get it now. Like I could actually stand up to an argument because I can see how somebody is trying to mislead me or use illogical reasons in their discussion. So that's what I'm here for, to help you have better critical thinking skills as you move throughout life. All right. Okay, so in the lecture notes, I actually have a link to all the memes that I've been giving you throughout the semester. My goal here was hoping that as you're going through the modules, you were also scrolling through those fallacies and kind of getting a good idea of what the fallacies are. I'm a visual learner, and I also learn through like if you're joking, like I get things that way. For me, if it's too serious, like I'll be honest, I kind of zone out. So I might be I'm trying not to be too serious, but it is serious. Critical thinking is important. But I also give the memes to kind of hopefully maybe that'll stick with you a little bit better. Anyway, that being the case, there's a link in the lecture notes that takes you to the memes. So that should help you. So fallacies are reasoning errors, okay? Excuse me, I was drinking something. So fallacies are errors in reasoning that can be seen as two different ways. Reasons that might seem logical but don't necessarily support the conclusion. Recall when we have the syllogisms and you have the two premises and then the conclusion. That's kind of like another part of reasoning, deductive reasoning. Okay. Anyway, so reasons that seem logical but don't necessarily support the conclusion. We're going to talk about those in a second. That's one part of fallacies. That's one kind. Then we have the type of fallacies that mislead. We have statements that distract the listener from the real issue. All right. We've got ones where the premises don't match the conclusion, but then we have some that mislead you, like red herring. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay. That being the case, now that you know there's two different types of categories of fallacies, we're going to go and dive a little deeper into the types of fallacies. So the first category we're going to cover is going to be fallacies or major categories for insufficient reasons, right? The reasons don't match the conclusions. First, we're going to talk about faulty analogy or false analogy. In the book, 94 to 95, you can take a look at some examples there, but I'll try and do my best to give you some examples here. A faulty analogy is when you're trying to compare two things that aren't common at all. Like, just they don't make any sense. Apples and oranges. Oh, it's like apples and oranges. There's a reason why people say that, because you can't compare two things. So an example would be anti-smoking laws won't work because they're just like prohibition laws. Well, smoking and drinking are two different things, apples and oranges. So the argument doesn't work because there's that fly. There's a fly in here. The reason why they don't work is because you cannot compare the two things. That doesn't work. Okay. So book's probably going to give you a better way of explaining this than me, but I'll do my best. You could think of it, especially as we go into advertising, when we think about comparing maybe a product to an experience. And an example would be Spring Soft fabric softener that's used in the book as an example. One of the lines that Spring Soft, one of the fallacious lines, which would be a false analogy, would be comparing Spring Soft fabric to fresh air, right? To two completely different things. So one of their lines here, Spring Soft fabric softener smells great. It's like hanging your clothes in fresh air. Right? That's two different things. And let's categorize them. Let's put the two next to each other. Actually hanging your clothes in fresh air versus using the fabric softener. There's a reason why you can't compare them, because there's two different things. So Spring Soft smell is actually done by chemicals, right? While fresh air is actually fresh air, right? It smells like fresh air because it actually is versus it being a chemically induced scent. Spring Soft also has a reoccurring cost involved, right? Every time you got to keep buying it because you run out of them, versus maybe a one-time clothesline that you'd have to buy to hang your clothes on. So you can't really compare them in that way either. With Spring Soft, it's kind of nice because you can quickly put them in the dryer and get them done within an hour, depending on how your dryer works, as compared to putting them outside if you got a humid day, if it's raining, you know, there's a lot of things that can get in the way of hanging something outside. This is why they don't work, okay? That's comparing apples and oranges, all right? We have some other examples. Go ahead and take a look at 94 and 95, but here, I'll throw a few out there. An example would be, I watched TV shows all my life, and it turned out fine. Well, I mean, if you're comparing, you know, maybe me or my parents to you, that's a, you know, 20 to 30 to 40 year difference, and that you can't do that. Like my parents compared to me compared to you. It's again, apples and oranges. The difference in the type of programs that were out there, the shows that were available, the limitations there, maybe what was going on in society, maybe, you know, the fact that we have video games that, you know, compete. You know, nowadays I see movies where they've got like a text message screen. We didn't have text message screen in I Love Lucy. Two completely different things, okay? You just can't compare them. I didn't have to study or take that many notes and I got an A. Well, that's not fair when you're trying to compare your experience with somebody else's. Say, you know, somebody who can walk by a classroom and, you know, absorb the knowledge versus somebody like me. It's like repetition, repetition, repetition for me to get it. And then sometimes I also have test anxiety. So while I might understand the material, I might have, you know, a little bit of a panic inside me when a test comes, and I might implode on myself. It doesn't mean I don't know the material. It's just I'm not good at taking tests. So, you know, not accounting for maybe previous knowledge either I had or someone else had that made them, you know, made the test a little easier for them, okay? This is why it would be a faulty analogy to compare the two people and experiences because they are not the same. When someone is supporting a position by comparing an idea, one idea or situation or plan to another, stop and evaluate whether or not the comparison is valid. If someone's trying to compare one thing to another, can you put them together and go, they do? Can you make columns and run them across and go, these are the same, this would make sense why you can compare the two? That's how you want to be able to find a faulty analogy. All right. When we first started this class, I gave the Big Bang Theory post hoc ergo propter hoc video. It's my favorite. I don't know. I just get excited because for some reason, I don't know if it's just in saying it or the fact that, you know, maybe I like some of the memes, like the kid who's in the airplane. He's like, every time the, you know, the plane shakes, I have to put on my seatbelt kind of thing. Well, that's post hoc ergo propter hoc. Here, it means after the fact, therefore, because of the fact. Okay, sorry if that's a little confusing. It's written down. You can reread it a couple times. It'll help you out. The idea is it establishes the false cause-effect relationship, assuming that since one thing happened first, it caused the other thing to happen. I picked up a penny, and every time, you know, I picked up a penny and the sun rose. Every time I pick a penny, the sun rises, you know, and you're like, just because you picked up the penny and the sun, you know, rose, it's not the fact that it was the penny, but that's the assumption, okay? Therefore, let's see here. Therefore, you won the lottery in the afternoon because you found a lucky horseshoe in the morning. Okay. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. False cause. Post hoc ergo propter hoc is also called false cause, just so you know. I put that in parentheses so you can take a look at it. False cause occurs when there's no real proof that one event caused the other. Causation, right, versus correlation. The difference between what causes something or what's correlated in, you know, coincidental kind of thing. Anyway, so the only evidence is that one occurred after the other. But just because one occurred after the other didn't mean there was a cause for the thing to come after, okay? A correlation is a connection between two objects or events, all right? So a correlation means there was an actual connection between the two. Versus a causation, a connection between two events in which it is established that one caused the other. Okay, that's the difference. So correlation, there's a connection, but noting that a correlation is sometimes the first step in exploring whether there's a causation, but does not equal causation. So just because there's a correlation does not mean there's a causation. I hope that did not confuse you too much. The notes kind of outline it a little bit better. Also, there's a fly in here buzzing around my head, and it's very distracting. I'm not going to start this video over. Okay? All right. If I breathe in a fly, I'm going to freak out. So let's see where this video goes. Hopefully this will be entertaining for you. I got a fly swatter just in case. I get distracted easy. I apologize. All right, going back to causation, a connection between two events, which is established. That it is true that this caused this other thing. There's a correlation, then there's an actual causation. A great example of a false cause would be superstition. Again, I picked up a horseshoe, and that's why I won the lottery, is because I picked up that horseshoe, right? An example is one of my favorites: find a penny right side up, pick it up, all good day, you'll have good luck. I pick up all the pennies. The problem is if it's not face up, I gotta like flip it over. Like, I'm very superstitious. I hate it. But that is an example. Or the idea of lucky or cursed. It creates a way of acting that could be, that then create a superstitions to come true. It's kind of like positive or negative thinking. If you're looking for the positive in a thing, if you're looking for it, it's going to show up. If you're looking for the negative, it's going to show up, because that's what you're looking for. So your brain is going to make that connection. It's going to create a thought of a correlation. It's going to assume there's a cause there because that's what it's looking for. Okay, that's how these usually pop up when we think of, oh, but it was lucky. You were hoping it would be. You were looking for that. You didn't think of all the times in which it didn't show up, right? Every time you've picked up that dang lucky horseshoe and you didn't win the lottery, you didn't think about that until you did win the lottery from the horseshoe. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Oftentimes, false cause is used for blame. Who does this a lot? Politicians. Always with the politicians, right? Oftentimes you'll hear maybe a president who steps into, maybe a good or bad economy. Usually if they come into a bad economy, it's like, I didn't create this mess. Or maybe they'll use it to take credit. It's like, I'm the reason why the economy is great. Even though they were only there for 2 weeks. I don't know if it's possible to create that kind of impact. I don't really think so. I am not an economics major, so I don't know. But anyway, the idea is that, using the false analogy to create this idea that they were the reason for the good, or it wasn't because of them for the bad. Okay. Blaming others is an ad hoc fallacy, and it creates more issues, and the reasoning ignores the more complicated factors that need to be understood in order to change the situation for the better. So the issue with a post hoc fallacy is if you're a president and you come in and you're like, I didn't create this mess, it could be causing a problem because you're pointing blame versus looking at what the solutions are going to be. Or taking credit for a good economy, but not looking to see what's been continuing on that you should keep doing to keep the economy going. Ta-da. Okay. Other examples would be the reason our team lost is because we weren't playing at home. A little bit on the superstitious. Sports very often does carry a lot of superstition. I wasn't wearing my lucky underwear, that's why we lost. And we weren't playing at home, that's why we lost, that sort of thing. I failed my math test because my teacher hated me, rather than take, account for the fact that the problems were just wrong. You assume the teacher hates you. It's like, it's not that the teacher hated you, it's just that you didn't get the answers right. Okay, so it's putting blame, post hoc ergo, propter hoc. She didn't like me, therefore I was going to fail the test. Okay. I saw how you put your television in the car. The reason why it doesn't work is because it was poorly placed in your car after you left the repair shop. So the repair shop saying, I saw you toss it in there. We fixed it. I saw how you put it in there. Right? So again, post hoc. Or I ate 3 pieces of pie at Joanne's house because I didn't want to hurt her mother's feelings, right? Putting blame on Joanne's, mother's feelings for why you ate so much pie and ended up with a tummy ache. I don't blame you. I love pie too. And I can't find my soccer ball because this is what children often do. I don't have children. I have friends who have children, and I hear this often, using excuses for things like, I can't find my soccer ball because a large green and brown monster came and ate it while I was sleeping, right? Trying to find an excuse for not finding something. And then sometimes, let's be honest, you just don't know the real cause of the problem. And because of that, we'll lean into things like giving reasons for, either homelessness or social issues. So we just kind of give reasons, but we don't really know the answer. We don't have a freaking solution. So we're just like, this. And we put blame on a thing, even if we don't really know. Oftentimes we want to believe things because we don't have an answer for them. Like, I don't know, aliens. No joke, I remember when Paradise burned, hometown, Paradisian. And I remember online seeing a lot of people who were blaming aliens, literal, like these whitish, unique looking aliens coming from the mountains. And that was hard for me to watch because I'm like, it's bad enough I have to deal with watching the fact that my hometown burned. And now people are coming up with wild imaginations about what could have caused it. To be honest, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe aliens. What the hell? I don't know anything. But sometimes we'll lean on these very extreme answers because we don't have the actual answer. Or maybe the actual answer is not what we want to hear. Maybe we don't want to hear that sometimes shit just happens, that our entire hometowns and everything we've ever owned or lived or understood burns. That's hard for your brain to concept. But sometimes something even more wild and bizarre actually makes everything else make more sense. Does that make sense? Like for me, I actually understand how someone could say aliens because, that makes more sense to me than the possibility of like my father's truck burning to like a puddle, right? This is why we believe in superstitions. This is why we believe in conspiracy theories, is because they sometimes will give an answer that almost, oddly enough, feels better than the truth. Like sometimes, you want to hear a conspiracy theory that, one of the government's controlling the weather. You'd rather hear that than believe that things are out of your control, like nature's out of control and hurricanes can come right through your state. Like we look for answers, and this is why post hoc ergo propter hoc, the fallacy is very, very common and used very often. But the problem is, while it's understandable that these are used, they're still not accurate because they still don't include the truth and the facts. Other times when we use this fallacy is a fear of being found out. We might blame someone for their shortcomings or their inability to answer a question. Politicians very often use this. You see it a lot. You're going to see it right now that it's always a turnaround because they don't want to admit fault. They don't want to admit truth. They don't want to admit realities because maybe they are afraid that their constituents won't be able to handle the realities. I don't know. I'm not a politician. I can't tell you. But they use it very often, and majority of it is because there's an ulterior motive in some way, whether it's to get the votes, get the money, get the thing. I don't know. But anyway, keep that in mind when you think of post hoc ergo propter hoc, when people are using blame, conspiracies. Those are all fallacies. Those are all ways to try and explain away something that they don't understand or don't want to accept the real cause of what the issues might be. So it's kind of a, again, like that kid in the family circus, it's like, he didn't, every time the plane shakes, or every time the light goes on, the plane shakes. That's what it is. And he's like, I want them to stop turning on that light so that the plane won't shake. Right? So think of it like that. Okay, we'll move on. Slippery slope. Slippery slope suggests that if an action is taken, it'll be the first step in a continuous path towards an inevitable bad end. If you let them, I'm reading this, I'm trying to remember, but also read at the same time. If you let them turn in one late paper, they'll never learn any discipline and they'll end up never being able to hold down a serious job. So the assumption here, the statement here would be that if I let you turn something in, it will inevitably ruin your life. Because if you start, turning in, one late paper, you're never going to know how to not, you're going to show up late to work. You're not going to be able to, hold down any serious job because you just can't get your life together because I let you turn in one paper late. I mean, that's not to say there might not be some kind of science where it shows that a lack of discipline will inevitably lead to maybe not the best life decisions. But I would say one late paper is really extreme to take you all the way down that slippery slope. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So this fallacy occurs when consequences of a potential action or policy are predicted. They're just assumed, predicted, but not substantiated by evidence. It'd be one thing if someone said, here's a study in which we saw that a continuous lack of discipline created the following behaviors in people. Hence, they continuously stopped, being successful in life because they didn't have a certain amount of discipline. That's different than making some wild assumption about how this might go down, in the we're just assuming, making assumptions. Ask that of you and me, right? So an example, I remember when I worked at Lowe's, I had a friend who came to me about the self-quarantine thing. And so this was their line to me. I'm just quoting them, and then we'll go from there. So their line, which was very much a slippery slope, was first we are self-quarantined. Next thing you know, we'll be martial lawed. Next, we're going to end up with chips in our arms and monitored daily. It's the end of times and everything's going to be changed. We're screwed. The way in which they wrote it was a little bit more eloquent, but at the same time, very much that was the point, right? Like, once we're we're being self-quarantined and it's the end of the world. It's all falling apart. That was in the moment. As we've pulled out from that situation, we're fine. It didn't go in that same extreme. We weren't martial lawed. If we're being monitored daily, we're on our phones. We're always being monitored. Anyway, so the extreme slope in which this person came to this conclusion was a slippery slope. This overly dramatic, based on just a simple, hey, look, we just self-quarantine for a little while, and then just let this pass, and then we'll come back to as we were. Okay, so think about that. One thing I'd like you to do, if you can, you got a moment, take a few minutes for yourself to think of any slippery slope fallacies you've either heard, you've seen through social media, through your friends, politicians. Maybe you've done it yourself. Look, it's easy, right? Like, I'm a very dramatic person, and I have probably done a handful of slippery slope statements in my lifetime, so it happens. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? I want you to kind of think about, because I'd like you to start thinking of how you're seeing these fallacies out and about in the real world. If you want more examples, 97 and 98 in our textbook. Straw man. So straw man's where we set up a weak or negative argument and claims that it is held by an opponent, right? We're consciously misrepresenting the opponent's views to make them seem easier to attack. Imagine you're in a boxing ring and your opponent is a literal straw man and you're making it easy to knock him out. That's the whole point of straw man, is something that's easy to attack. And so so here's an example. Let me help you out. I'm going to give you a little example here. The president wants the U.S. to have a healthcare program that is like those countries, of those countries that are socialist. I will stand against socialism to taking over our country. So what the argument here was taking the idea of a healthcare program and turning that into a straw man, which was calling it socialism, because it's a touchy word, it's a subject thing, so that when they use that again, they're like, see, they're going to turn us into a socialist, and I refuse for our country to be socialists. Okay, so that is the goal between straw man, is taking a piece of that argument and turning it to where it would be a weaker argument to argue. Weaker statement to argue. Okay. Again, imagine a boxer in a ring with two opponents. One opponent is a real live human and the other is made of straw. And the boxer knocks out the straw man and goes, victory! When in reality, the real opponent still hasn't been is still untouched. So you're not really arguing the point of the argument. You're manipulating it to where you can now argue a piece of it that's not even accurate to the original argument. I know. Let me give you a better explanation. So an example would be, say somebody is arguing that AK-47 should be outlawed. And the idea there is they're like, AK-47 should be outlawed because nobody needs that much firepower to be protected. The argument being like, do you need that much power? AK-47 is pretty hardcore. That's their statement. You don't need an AK-47. Okay, you don't need that much power. The straw man argument to that turns it around and says, hey, my opponent is against the use of firearms for self-protection. And so she would allow criminals to possess firearms and deny their use to law-abiding citizens. So see what they did is they turned it around. It wasn't the idea of getting rid of all guns. Like, that was definitely not whatever this person's argument was. Theirs was just a specific type of gun. One that, studies would show that it's probably a gun that doesn't need to be out there, right? Like, I don't know who needs it. They're saying they should be outlawed. That's all they're saying is that particular gun. Well, the straw argument is saying, oh, they're saying all guns should be outlawed. That's not what they're saying. So that's how keep your eyes open, because I see that so often in comments in social media where people will turn something around. It's like, that's not what we were arguing. Just that this particular gun shouldn't be there. Not all guns. So anyway, in fact, I think I saw this recently with the California law. It was the 10, the thing that goes into 10 something, whatever. The thing that goes in the bottom of a gun, right? That, sorry if that was triggering. They outlawed the thing. You guys are hearing it. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, magazine. All right, magazine. They're outlawing the 10 something magazine, and a lot of people are really upset about it. I'm not going to say anything. I know nothing. I'm just saying that a lot of people had the same straw man argument when they were, arguing for this particular thing. So anyway, wasted your life with that. I apologize. Anyway, the whole point here is to pay attention to how somebody is making arguments on a particular thing. Where are they manipulating the argument to create a straw man so they can knock it at the knees? Okay. 98 and 100 will give you more examples that are probably better than mine. Go ahead and check out the means as well. Those are very helpful. Hasty conclusions or generalizations. We've already used this a handful of times in some of our other chapters. Again, it's the idea that one assumes the whole. That's a fallacy. Okay. Hasty generalizations presumes that a general principle is applicable to every case. All right. Maybe you would say, since a Doberman pinched you when you were a kid, you claim that all Doberman pinchers bite. Right? And a lot of you, I use the example of, one cat was a jerk. All cats are jerks. Well, I mean, a lot of them are, but there's some nice ones too. So it's still a hasty generalization to assume the whole, right? There's some really sweet guys out there. A generalization that is drawn from a small and thus inadequate sample of information. Remember, samples. Okay. So you assume, and this just happens because this is humans like to categorize people. You assume because one Republican or Democrat did a thing, you assume that they all are. We have the bleeding heart Dems, we have the stingy Republicans, or the liberals, or the conservatives. Like these extreme points of people based on their political, who they voted for or whatever. Not all people who voted this way or that way all think the same. In fact, sometimes say you voted for, one president, even though you lean in this political party, you voted for this particular president because you're like, that's going to be, more helpful for the economy and me in some way, or whatever. Or maybe you voted this way because you're like, this helps me and my kid who has, maybe disabilities, and I know that this president pushes more for, ADA and, things that are going to support my child with disabilities, right? Not always is it based just on political party. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. It currently is. That's just the divide that we're in. But a hasty generalization is to assume that all Democrats are one way or all Republicans are that way. That's not the case. Okay. And I'm sure many of you might know certain people of a different political, ideology and go, oh yeah, that's weird that you're a Republican or a Democrat. I would have pegged you as a Republican or a Democrat or whatever. The whole point is, let's be mindful about how we are generalizing people, places, and things as we think about ways in which we might maybe make an argument towards something or make an assumption, right? Stereotypes. All right. All right. When people take a stand or a claim based on limited evidence, you need more to make a whole statement. Okay. That's not to say that, and that's a tough one because you might see if you take polls, there might be, if you took polls of Republicans, they might actually have majority actually might have a certain way of thinking, doing, or being. Same with Democrats, thinking, way, being or doing, that might justify your point. But on an individual basis, that's where it gets a little tricky. Okay, so one does not assume the whole. Let's see here. Always make sure you're using evidence that helps you, right? Statistics, data, all that stuff. It helps make your assumptions or your statements a little bit more valid, and you can prove it. All right. Remember how there was that video of the scientists that were making assumptions about the rats and the way in which they changed the outcome of the rats' performances. When we make assumptions about people, it actually creates a negative energy and effect when we look at them in a negative way versus if we look at people in a positive way. So it's just important when we're making hasty generalizations or stereotypes, we're mindful of the actions because they do have potential destructive labels on them, okay? Or you might create an overly confident person too. So you never know. Let's see here. Very similar to post hoc ergo propter hoc when we think about superstitions is sometimes when we look at someone with a hasty generalizations, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, a process where an expectation becomes a reality. Okay, so let's just kind of. No, I didn't want to confuse you on that one, but anyway, sometimes that happens when we lean into these assumptions about things. Okay. It's important not to assume these hasty generalizations are true. Instead, always investigate the truth. Don't limit yourselves or others to these generalizations and check the quality of sources in which your information came from. What's behind the information that you're receiving? Is their intention is creating fear, intention getting money, creating power, control? I don't know. You tell me. Okay. What's the intent behind the statement when somebody is using a hasty generalization? All right. Let's go. False dilemma, or the either or fallacy, or false dichotomy. Okay, so it kind of has a few different ones. Oftentimes, you're going to hear it as the either or fallacy, but it's also considered the false dilemma or the false dichotomy. Okay. And here, the either or fallacy, I'll probably be using that the most here, assumes that an issue only has two sides when in fact there's multiple different sides and many different facets to which could be the right answer. When you hear that your friend failed a math test and you found easy, either you didn't study or you don't have an aptitude for math. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Well, that's a false dilemma. There's no either or. If you were to say, well, either you're not good at math or you didn't study, it's like there could be so many different reasons why you didn't pass a test. And that's, again, a hasty generalization would make the assumption that you either did this or you didn't do that, right? There's two. You can actually have two fallacies in one. Damn, I'm really confusing you. The idea here is there's oftentimes more than one answer when it comes to stuff like this. I can't think of a situation in which it's either this or that in life. I can't think of one, either this or that. Anything that's it's either this or that, that's going to be a fallacious statement, is usually how that goes. It's either you didn't study or, you have no aptitude for math. Again, I get panicky when it comes to tests. So it's not that I don't have the aptitude, it's just that I have anxieties. Okay? All right? So it'd be a hasty generalization to assume there's only two ways in which you can fail a test. There's many different ways you can fail a test. Think back to when we looked at the memes where, because I remember during 9/11, you're either for the United States or you're against us. You're either for America or you're against us. That's an either or fallacy. That's like, well, nah, you can't, either you're either for the United States or you go home or go somewhere else, right? That's not how that works. You can totally have disagreements with how the government's doing things. That's why we're the United States. You can protest, you can vote, you can do all these different things. It's not an either love us or you leave. That's not how that works, okay? So in other words, there are many alternatives to situations. So oftentimes we think it's very easy to make these very erroneous reasonings because in our minds, we like things to be clear cut. I want a yes or no thing, just black and white. Make it easy. Don't make me think. Don't make me critically think about what some possible answers might be for the situation, right? This is why some of those other, post hoc ergo propter hoc things pop up where superstitions, it's like, I only want, it was either aliens or, there's only two options. Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes there's multiple reasons why something happens. But as our brains, it's hard to think of complex situations where there's multiple reasons why something might have happened. You know, like when the fires came and there was these big, huge holes in the ground. Well, people were like, oh, that's where there's space lasers. I'm like, well, when you think about science and you think of how hot that fire was, what was happening is root systems were catching fire and exploding and creating these massive holes. Like my house up in Paradise was actually literally, they cut off the stump and built over it. But when the heat got so hot, it actually ended up exploding, and rocks were breaking too because of the heat. If you understand the science, it makes sense. If you don't understand the science, you want to look for something that's going to make an answer to you. Sometimes you create an either or fallacy as well, wherein you're like, it was either aliens or it didn't happen, right? That's an either or fallacy. Okay, in other words, the world is not clear cut, so either or fallacies will not work for you. Language encourages polarized thinking by including words to describe things that don't have a middle ground. When we think of the difference between we have beautiful, and we have ugly, but what's in between? Average? Is average right? Well, I guess maybe that would be an in between. Strong or weak? Average, right? So what's the middle words that we're using to help explain something? Maybe you're extroverted or introverted. Is there something in between there? Brave or cowardly? What are these? We just, society kind of leans us into these either or mindsets because we just are maybe at a loss for certain words, or maybe our vocabulary is a little limited in our ways in which we're able to describe something. You know, happy or sad? What's in between? Neutral, right? But it's not often that we use the middle words. We very often use the extreme words because they feel more categorized and we can put them in a box because that's what we like our brains to be. Begging the question. All right, this one's, you saw the fly. I almost ate it. Begging the question results when you present a debatable question as if it was fact. And usually it's buried inside of a bunch of other, you know, a different, bigger argument. So an immoral book such as Huckleberry Finn, notice they use the word immoral, the immoral book such as Huckleberry Finn must be removed from our school's library because it will corrupt young minds. When they use the term immoral, it's presented as if it's already an established fact that it's an immoral book. It's not an immoral book, but it is used in this particular argument to make the statement of why the book should be burned or banned or whatever the case may be. Very often people will do that in a sequence of making a bigger argument. They're going to manipulate something before the thing to make their point. And again, that what an immoral book such as Huckleberry Finn, they're trying to give this descriptive word. There's no fact in that. Okay, there's no fact to back that up. But they use it as fact to back up their argument to ban books or ban that particular book or whatever the case may be. A fallacy occurs when a speaker or writer assumes what needs to be proven. Okay, look at pages 103 and 104 for an example. This can take place in two ways. One, the speaker makes the claim and then asks you to prove it, that his or her claim is not correct. So begging the question would be putting the burden of proof on you. You got to prove me wrong, right? An example would be, why wouldn't you call 1-800-DENTIST to get the best professional care? Why wouldn't you? They put the burden of proof on you. Prove me I'm wrong, okay? Where do you see that? Advertising. Advertising does it a lot. Or you might put in, like you might build on an unproven assumption about their argument as if it was a fact. This is a terrible example, and I apologize profusely. I forgot to edit this, but an example of an unproven assumption in their argument as if it were fact would be, have you stopped beating your wife? God, why did I use that as an example? I apologize, y'all. I might have to correct that. Can't remember why I used that. Anyway, right? And it's an assumption that was already a proven fact. Like, what? No. I would say that when you're thinking of building on an unproven, in fact, let's do begging the question as, I'm going to go in here and show you an example of that. Begging the question. It's number 3 on our list in our modules, so you can take a look at that. A better example of begging the question would be, try to assume their premise was already correct, right? So one example would be, aren't you thankful that your childhood happened before technology took over? The assumption being that childhoods before technology were better than childhoods with technology, right? It's this assumption of an argument as if it's a fact. Like, oh, my childhood before technology was the best. But how do you, there's no fact in that. Okay. Anyway, so I think I'm going to use that as an example in the examples here. Go ahead and take a look at the Winnie the Pooh one. That was actually another really good one about how he goes to search for the treasure, and Piglet's like, "Are you sure this is the right place, Pooh?" And he's like, Pooh's like, "Of course it is, Piglet. I made up the map, didn't I?" So he's making the assumption that it is a proven fact, even though they just made it up. Okay, so there's an example. Okay, so now that we've done fallacious reasoning or reasoning errors, let's go into fallacies that mislead. These are always fun because oftentimes you see this as politicians and advertisers. Actually, I'm going to take that back. Politicians mostly use ad hominem. Yeah, pretty much. Sometimes, appeal to tradition, sometimes ads will do that, like Coke. Coke does it often. They bring back some old school videos and things to make you go, oh, Coke. I think Volkswagen did that once. So it's a whole history thing. Anyway, I'll talk about that in another class. Okay, so fallacies that mislead, one of which is my favorite, red herring. And the reason why I love this one is because it's visually in my brain. And it helps me to remember. And I'll give you an example about how it came about. So a red herring represents a move of desperation. Hey, look over here, but you're really doing something over here. The whole thing is distraction, misleading you officially, right? I really want you to take this route. Don't look at what's happening here. Go over here. All right. It occurs when a writer changes the subject to divert the reader's attention away from the weakness of their argument. An example is, yes, my candidate has no experience in politics, but she's the daughter of a former U.S. president, and isn't her pictures with him so cute? It's just so cute, right? I just see the little red herrings, little fish over here, and like, look over here at the fishy. Ignore the fact that my candidate has absolutely no idea what they're doing. Look at the fishy. All right, that's what they're doing there. All right, so a fallacy in which reasons offered to support conclusions lead the listener away from the issue that's being under consideration, okay? The reason why I love this is this term actually comes from a technique that was used to distract hunting dogs by using smoked fish, which is red herring, to throw off the hunting dogs who were following a particular scent. So for some reason I think of that. It also makes me think of a movie, Shawshank Redemption is what that reminds me of for some reason. Okay. Kids do this all the time. They use it as a form of argument, as a defense mechanism against parental demands, right? Oh, but they use all these distractions. On page 105 and 106 give some really good examples. Let me see if I have any good red herring examples. Let's see, go to red herring. Take a look at the memes. That's what I'm looking at right now. See if there's something good. We can't worry about the environment. We're in the middle of a war. It's like, well, you should probably think about both of those things. Okay? So anyway, take a look at the memes. They do a much more fun job than I'm doing here. Ad hominem, again, that's one of my other favorites, where we're attacking the person rather than the issue. Oh my God, I see that all over the place now. That's like all you see. I'm telling you, go to your comments, and anything that has either like a political post or something, it's always an attack on the person. Ad hominem attacks the person rather than the issue. The governor supports higher emission standards for automobiles. What else would you expect from a has-been movie star, right? Attacking the person, but not the actual issue at hand. The Latin term comes from to the man, ad hominem, to the man, or attacking the person. Ad hominem occurs when a person is attacked on a personal quality that has no relevance, completely irrelevant to the issue that's under discussion. Ad hominem, going straight for the man, okay? I get this one wrong all the time. Tu quo que. Tu quo que, all right? Or two wrongs make a right. Two wrongs make a right. We already pretty much know where this is going. Go to page 107, 109 for a few more examples, but tu quo que means, fly, back at you. It occurs when you avoid addressing an issue or hostile charge by making a similar charge against your proponent. Don't tell me to lose weight. You need to stop smoking, or don't tell me to lose weight. You smoke. All right. Don't look at me. Look at you. Tu quo que. Tu quo que. You're going to be saying that now when you get home or when you get off this. Tu quo que. So a fallacy that is used to excuse bad behavior on the grounds of someone else's bad behavior. Okay. It occurs when someone rationalizes. Remember 9 list of rationalizations. It occurs when a person rationalizes that one person or group's action is justified because some other person or group's actions was just as bad or just as worse. Okay? It's an excuse for bad behavior. 2 wrongs make a right. Okay? And 2 rights make a left. Hey-o! Is that right? All right. You can't blame me for going out when you're so moody all the time. Oh, that's okay. That's feisty. That's some fighting words right there, okay? And then why did I get a ticket when there were at least 3 other people going faster than I was? Doesn't change the fact that you were still speeding, all right? And they did it first. Why am I getting in trouble? Every time I hear 2 wrongs make a right, I always think of siblings fighting because that's what me and my brothers used to do. Well, that's not fair, Bo, blah, blah, blah. Bo's my brother, so that's why. All right. Again, it's justifying bad behavior for legitimate reasons. So taking money out of the cash register because you're being robbed is different than taking the money out of the cash register because, you feel like the company owes you. 2 wrongs make a right now. Again, justifying bad behavior for legitimate reasons is different than doing it for bad reasons, right? So again, when you're taking money out of the register, if you're being robbed, it's a lot different than if you're robbing it, okay? Or pushing someone who's about to be hit by a car. You don't want to be pushing people, but if you see a car's coming and that's the best way to get them out of the way, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, okay? All right. Oftentimes people say, well, look who's talking. Look at you. Denying a claim because they think that the speaker who's making the claim is hypocritical. Well, who are you to tell me what to do? Look at you, why should I listen to you? Depending on who maybe it's not an authority figure. It's like, who are you to tell me what to do? If it's my brother, I'm like, oh, you can't tell me what to do. You're not my mother. All right. Or to my parents, you did it when you were my age. Like, you're telling me not to smoke, but you smoked, right? Well, maybe they learned a lesson and they're trying to keep you from doing the same thing they did as a mistake. Maybe they're trying to help you. Okay. You can tell I don't have kids. All right. And sometimes it's valid to point out hypocritical behavior. It is okay to point out when someone is doing something, that's hypocritical. So like for me, why is the teacher always so concerned about us being late when she's late all the time? Like, that is absolutely fair, right? To say that. It's, unfair or not, the point of being late is going to affect your grade, right? So it's okay to point it out, but me as a teacher, I should be better at being on time if I'm a late person. So, I should hold myself to the same standards I'm holding the students, right? So I think it'd be fair to point out hypocritical behavior, but sometimes whether or not the hypocritical behavior is there doesn't negate the fact that you still did the thing wrong, doesn't negate the fact that you were still late. Okay. Sometimes people will say, well, how come she's mad at us for being late when she's late all the time? Right? See how they turn it around? Again, you're still late, right? Whether or not the teacher's late, you're still late. Okay. I know that doesn't feel good on your insides. I try and be fair in situations like that. So, but anyway, just think about that when we think of, 2 wrongs making a right. Whether or not another person was wrong, it doesn't excuse the fact that you broke the law, you did the bad behavior, okay? Sensus gentium, or bandwagon, or ad populum. So bandwagon is that is the name of the fallacy. Most people have probably heard the bandwagon fallacy, or ad populum. That one's a very common one. Sensus gentium, I don't hear very often. It's usually the other way around, but anyway. I give you all the options of the different names in case you hear them somewhere. Again, the bandwagon fallacy was an attempt to establish that something is true or worthy simply because many people believe it is. everybody's doing it, right? Everyone's doing it. It's like the lemurs going off the edge of the cliff. Oh, they're doing it. I'm going to do it too. George did it. All right, so the speed limit in Paradise should be raised to 45 miles an hour because everybody drives that fast anyway, right? Bandwagon, just because, therefore, just because everyone else is doing it, therefore we should do it? No, that's a fallacy. A fallacy that consists of a false appeal to the authority of everyone. The assumption that, again, false appeal to authority, remember the appeal to authority, that everyone is the authority? No, just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's right. This fallacy is based on the assumption that the course of action should be taken or an idea should be supported because everyone's doing it or everybody believes it. Just because everyone believes, without any scientific proof, if everyone believes that, I don't want to say aliens exist because I don't want to be proven wrong. Like one day it's like, oh, so my teacher said aliens didn't exist, and they do. An example of assuming that, well, everyone believes that the sky is green doesn't mean that the sky is green. That's a terrible example, but you kind of get the idea, right? Just because everyone believes it to be true doesn't mean it is true. And to have the ad populum fallacy is because all these people believe it to be true, it is incorrect, okay? Because it has been proven otherwise. Appeal to tradition is a fallacy that occurs when a belief or action is supported on the ground that it conforms to traditional ideas and practices. Just as a note, this is a very tough one, and it is also a very delicate one because a lot of times people hold their traditions and very close to them. And there are there's religious, national, and personal and familial, traditions that people hold very true to them. And they might use the statement of, this is what our family does. This is a family tradition. I wouldn't necessarily call it an appeal to tradition, and it's not to negate or to demean anyone's need or use of a tradition. I have to make sure you know that. But the idea is that the fallacy here is the unwillingness to change in a way that's outside of maybe a religious or familiar kind of tradition, maybe more in a political sense or something, or maybe at a job, or you can take a look at some of the meme examples that I give too. But the idea here is that an appeal to tradition would be something along the lines of like, hey, let's vote for Smith. We always have a member of the Smith family in our state legislature. It doesn't address that the candidate may or may not have qualifications. They're just basing on the tradition that the Smiths have always been a part of the state legislature. They're not, the issue is whether or not this candidate is qualified, but they're using the appeal to tradition to say, well, we should do it this way because we've always had a Smith in the state Senate. So, or state legislature. So just think of it in that way. It would be, it gets a little complicated because then you would fall into the fallacy of appeal to change, like to change something for the better. Like it gets a little hairy on this one. So we're going to lean more into the understanding that an appeal tradition leans outside of things that we would normally do, like Christmas traditions or whatever, religious traditions. One appeal to tradition fallacy would be, all men in our family are lawyers. You will be one too. An appeal to tradition would be, you should be a lawyer just because we've always had lawyers in the family. Okay. Or our workers have always been happy working 9 to 5. There's no need to change that schedule. Again, appealing to tradition while ignoring the fact that science has proven, in fact, it's been put into place that a 4-week work week actually has created a better atmosphere, better morale, and better work ethic from the people who partook in the studies on whether or not this was good. So to say, it's people have always been happy working 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Well, study shows that actually when you change that up, people are okay with the change and in fact do much better. So anyway, okay, appeal to tradition. Again, look at the examples that are there. Try and ignore the fact that sometimes the people might use, well, we've always done it this way because this is our tradition within the family, when it comes to like either religions or, I don't know, cultural things, that's a little different than when we're appealing to tradition in the sense of like, you know, we're always going to do it this way. We don't want to even look at the research that, you know, changing up the work week would probably be better for most people. I've done it. It's okay. I don't know. I've done both. Okay, appeal to pity. We're almost there, guys. I promise you, we're almost there. Appeal to pity is used when you win an argument by preying on someone's sympathy, pity, or guilt rather than making a logical argument. I wasn't able to open the assignments on Canvas because we didn't have money to pay our electric bills and our power was cut off, right? Sometimes power does get shut off, but appealing to pity is the fallacy, right? Versus the, you know, just using an explanation versus trying to get the pity in order to get something changed or whatever the case may be. A logical fallacy that occurs when someone argues that others should follow a course of action and hold a certain belief for no other reason than they should feel compassion or for the irrelevant claims or responsibility of the speaker. I feel really bad at that first example because I don't know if that's going to really considered irresponsibility. It's an expensive world in PG&E. Yeah, so that's I don't know if I like that as an example now that I'm thinking about it. Let's use some other examples that appeal to pity that would work better here. So, you really should go out with me because if you don't, I'm going to be really upset. That's an appeal to pity. Like, I'm going to be upset if you don't. Even though I know you're busy, you're going to really hurt my feelings if you don't go. The appeal to pity is the person's feelings. Who the other person didn't even recognize the fact, like, I know you're busy, but what about me, right? Appeal to pity. I know you're on a diet, but I slaved all day on this feast, and you should indulge just this one time, right? I spent all this time and effort on this feast, even though I know you're not eating. What about me, right? Or you may have a lot to do, but it won't be any fun for me if you don't come to this party. Like, I know you're busy, but what about me? All right. So appeal to pity is actually a very selfish fallacy because the person making the argument isn't, they mention, but don't consider the other person's plight or issue or situation. Okay. All right. More examples on page 110. Equivocation occurs when you shift the meaning of a key term in the middle of an argument to make the conclusion appear to follow logically. Again, we're misleading from your premise is the idea here. So for an example is, in the realm of human experience, we have all find ourselves presented with difficult choices to make. It is then very human experience to make the mistake that my client did. So they mislead you away from what the client did, right? Whatever this, maybe it was something terrible, maybe they murdered somebody, but it's like, hey, sometimes in human experiences, right, they focus in on this human experience, that sometimes people have difficult choices to make, and my client just had a human experience. That's all. Sure, they murdered somebody, but it was a human experience. It happens sometimes. Doesn't negate the fact that the crime was still committed. Okay? A fallacy in which the same word used also has two different meanings. So, an example is, this hurts me more than it hurts you. Right? Your parents are giving you a little spanking and it's hurting your bottom, right? But the parents like, but it hurts my emotions more than it hurts your bottom. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the idea is the word hurt is being used as both a physical and emotional pain as if they're the same, but they are not. So equivocation. I think of equivocation as equals, kind of what it pops in my head. That's how I remember it. You can also do, you're against murder, so you must be against capital punishment. Remember, capital punishment, sentencing prisoners to death, assuming that it's the same thing. It is not the same thing. Murder and capital punishment are not the same thing, but they're trying to use it as such. Okay? Consequence versus an actual crime. Crime versus consequence. Okay? I don't know what the fuss is all about organic foods. Everything I eat comes from some part of the earth, so there isn't any difference. The assumption being organic matter, which comes from the earth, versus organic foods, which is a farming process. Okay? Anyway, two different ways in which organic is used. Alrighty, so go ahead and take a look at examples 11 through 112. And you know what? We did good. It's at least an hour. I'm losing my voice. Good luck. Message me if you have questions, but I highly suggest take a look at that link with all the memes. They're a little bit more fun than me yammering for an hour. So anyway, Good luck. Have fun. Keep up the great job.